Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our video series where we discuss everyday legal topics with TLR Law. Today we're going to be talking about buying a business in Manitoba, including how to ensure you're getting that process started correctly from the very beginning. TLR Law makes law accessible for the average Canadian, including sharing clear and understandable advice when you're doing something like buying a company or starting one. Many people, of course, dream of owning their own business, being their own boss. You can start one from scratch, and the team at TLR Law can help you there, setting up a corporation or a partnership or whatever makes sense. But many people prefer to buy a going concern, and today we're going to delve into that from a legal perspective. My name's Adam Dooley. I'm your co-host today, alongside Philippe Richet, co-owner and principal lawyer at TLR Law. Hi, Philippe.
Hi, Adam.
And how are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Doing great. We've got new chilly fall weather that is making dressing for work a challenge because it's always cold in the morning and warm in the afternoon.
I know, and it's happened quickly too. It just seems like we went from 30-degree plus weather to fall-like weather.
Well, I haven't turned on my furnace yet, so that's a small bonus. So let's get started. What should a person do even before considering purchasing a business? Like, I'm sure there are certain steps that you would advise people to go through as they're even considering this process.
Yeah, so buying a business is quite an undertaking. It's not something that you just decide to get one day to do, or you can one day, but it can take several years just to find the right business to get started. And you have to find the right business and that's aligned with your interests, that's aligned with your skills. You have to have the money, so you need to save some money to buy a business or find somebody to help you with the equity in order to get started, because buying a business, you usually need, even when you're borrowing, you need about 25% down. You want to talk to organizations like your banks or your credit unions or the Development Bank of Canada, for example. They have a lot of resources. So, before you even before you even find a target business to buy, you got to consider all of these other things beforehand, and how much of a business do you want to start with? Do you want a small business where you have a small team? Do you have the resources to acquire a larger business? So there's a lot of planning to go into that. You want to have a relationship with an accountant to help you through that kind of math phase or financial phase, figuring out how much money you need. You want to talk to banks and credit unions to get an idea of how much you can afford. And then if you're Métis, for example, or Indigenous, there are some grants available. So you want to, follow through with those. There's all kinds of organizations that are available to provide that further information. So there are, additional resources, financial resources that are available. So you want to make sure you understand what those are. And that'll help you make the best decision you can when it does come time to start negotiating.
There is a lot to think about. There really is. Now, when I'm thinking about this as a business owner who, let's say I want to buy another business. I want to add a business to expand my own, maybe a new service line or something like that. I'm going to ask things like, well, why are they interested in selling? And what's their current financial status? Do they have debts? But I'm also interested in knowing what I'm buying. Am I buying equipment? Am I buying buildings? Am I buying a client list? Maybe talk to us a little bit about just those sorts of things. Like what are you buying when you're buying a business?
Right. So you brought up two concepts there that, and I think we should separate the two. The first is, you take a look at the financials and, the inside workings of the business. That's your due diligence. That's so you have a target company and you might be interested in it, but you want to do some due diligence, and we can talk about the due diligence a little bit. But you also talked about more generally, which is I think a step before you even start thinking about due diligence, about what is it exactly you want to purchase. You can purchase a number of things when you're buying a company, or you don't even have to buy a company. You can have your own company, and you can be thinking about buying new customers, for example, a customer list. You could be thinking about buying a division of a company. I helped somebody recently acquire a division of a larger company, and for him, it became his company. So you need to figure out what it is that you want to buy. If you're buying an entire business or if you're buying an aspect of the business, you need to be able to identify that. You need to be able to price it. What's it worth to you? And if you're in the business, for example, you're in the marketing and PR business, Adam, and you're looking at another marketing company and you're looking at their customer list, well, you're the person in the best position to determine what that list is worth, right? Because it's your experience, that's your area. I wouldn't be able to help you with that, to give you any idea there. And an accountant may not really be able to help you much with that either. You're really the best person to figure that out. So before you even jump into the due diligence, you want to figure out what it is you're buying. If you're buying an aspect of a business, a division of a business, a customer list, or just a certain department of a business, then that's how you treat it. And you're just acquiring that aspect of the business. There's less risk because you're buying less things. You already have your own area of the business that you know how it works. And what you're trying to do there is just plug it into your own business so that you can go forward.
Right.
The other way is to buy the whole business, and then we can talk about that. There's different things to do there, and the things you want to think about there is: do you want to own the company yourself, or are you buying the assets? Are you buying the shares? So who's buying the business? Is it you? Is it a company you have? So those are questions you need to ask yourself, and I'm sure we're going to talk about in more detail in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so maybe just tell us, what is the difference between assets and shares? Because I think people can become confused what they're purchasing. Like an asset would be like a building or equipment,
right?
Or it could be a customer list, as you mentioned. But in the shares, you're talking about kind of buying the actual going concern of the company, and the current owner is maybe moved out entirely, right?
Yeah, so I think we have a naming issue here, and this is really a distinction that lawyers and accountants understand much better than the general public, and not because we're special. It's the legal structure and the taxation effect of how it works. There's different ways the tax laws interact with that, and from a legal perspective, the legal entity owning the business is different. But from a practical point of view, from the business owner's point of view, from the business manager's point of view, the operator of the business, there is no difference between a share purchase and an asset purchase. If you're buying the business as a going concern, you're buying the business. So if you're buying it as an asset purchase, you're buying, and we'll talk about what that actually means in legal terms, but it's the same thing. You're buying the business. You're buying the hard assets, which could be the building and the furniture, and if there are vehicles, if there's equipment, you're buying the computers, you're buying that. You're buying all the processes. So when you're buying the employment agreements that you have with your employees. So the way your reception answers the phone, for example, you have a way of doing that. How you take messages, if your policy is to get back to people within 2 hours, then those are processes. That's part of the ongoing concern. Your relationship with your customers, the goodwill that you've developed, your marketing, your website, your brand, and what that means. All of that are part of the assets. So you have the tangible assets, the things you can feel, like this computer that I have. And then you have your reputation that you're buying, and that's an intangible asset. And it could be your Google reviews that you have out there, and just the general goodwill that the current company that has been able to create. So those are assets as well. They're intangible assets, but they're worth something to you. So you can buy that, or you can buy the shares of a company, and all those assets are inside that shell of the company, and then you're just acquiring the ownership of that company. So those are the two ways of doing it, and that's essentially the difference between an asset purchase and a share purchase. It's a real difference, especially in the eyes of the law. But at the end of the day, from a practical point of view, there's not going to be much difference. You're going to achieve your ends one way or the other by buying either an asset or doing an asset purchase or a share purchase.
Got it, I think. Now, it sounds to me though that you really should be consulting a lawyer during this process, and maybe maybe you can talk a little bit about why that is a good idea, and maybe a little bit about what happens if you don't consult a lawyer, because it seems to me there's lots of pitfalls and tripwires you could possibly run into if you're not if you don't have good advice.
Yeah, so yeah, when you're buying, I mean, I can't imagine anybody buying a business these days, worth anything. I mean, small businesses can, like, if your kids have a lawn mowing business that they want to sell to somebody else, I'm assuming you don't really need help with that. But if anybody's buying a business in which they're trying to make a living, it has to generate at least enough income to support you. I can't imagine anybody doing that without the assistance of a lawyer and an accountant for that. So you absolutely need to talk to a lawyer and accountant when you're buying a business, because there are taxation issues at play here. And depending how you buy the business, whether you buy it as an asset purchase or you're buying it as a share purchase, there will be some taxation. There's also the issue of how you're going to borrow money. If you're borrowing money, how you're going to structure that. If you're buying the shares of a company, it gets a little tricky, because I'm borrowing money to buy. Let's say I'm buying $1 million company and I have $250,000 down of my own personal money. I put that down. I'm borrowing $750,000 to do that. I'm borrowing that personally. So it's my own line of credit, $750,000. It's Philippe Boucher that's making those payments on a monthly basis. I have no income to offset that expense. So I can't write that expense off, because it's the company that is generating the income. So the company would generate a bunch of income. It wouldn't have any debt, because I'm the one who holds the debt. And that money would accumulate inside the corporation. And I can take that money out to pay the debt, but I have to pay taxes on that money when I take it out. So I'm paying taxes on the money. And the whole purpose of borrowing money is that's an expense of the company. So you run into a problem that way. So that's why it's really important to get an accountant involved, because there are ways of managing that. What we end up doing typically is we create a new corporation that borrows the money, and then on the day that the new corporation buys the ongoing concern, we amalgamate the two companies together, and then the debt of one becomes the debt of the other, and the income of one becomes the income of the other, and that it's just one, and then it can offset that way. So that's not something you can do on your own. You'll absolutely need the assistance of a professional to help you with that. And I'm not.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to pick up on that whole team aspect of professionals that you need to be working with. I know exactly what you mean. You want to keep the Canada Revenue Agency away as much as possible. Those are people that you don't really want to be talking to a lot outside of just regular filings. And the best way to do that is to get a really good team, a legal team, an accounting team working together. So you as part of the process here, you really work closely with accountants and other professionals. Can you tell me a little bit about that and how that benefits people buying businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically what we'll do is, when we're putting an asset purchase or a share purchase together, now we usually come in after the owners of the two businesses have kind of landed on the kind of high and general principles of the contract. So typically they'll figure out what the price is going to be. They'll figure out when they hope the transaction to occur. Sometimes the people are a little ambitious. When they've made the deal, they want it to happen quickly. The seller wants to get their money and they want to get out, and the buyer wants to get in and start operating the business. So sometimes the timelines are a little optimistic. So we need to sometimes bring people back down to earth a little bit and say, no, there is a process that we have to follow here. So typically they'll come to us with, the kind of broad strokes of how they want this agreement to go through. Usually they don't know yet if it's going to be a share purchase or an asset purchase. Okay. They may, if they've talked to their accountant, but that's about it. So typically we'll get the broad strokes. We'll have a conversation with them. We'll find out who their accountant is. We'll make sure we understand that the client speaks to the accountant, so that they're aware of the accounting side of things, especially on the sales side, because on the sales side, if you're selling a business, there are significant differences between selling the shares of your company and selling the assets of your company. So we want to make sure that they get the right advice for that. And when we're drafting a share purchase or an asset purchase agreement, there's a bunch of sections in there that deal with finances. And it could be adjustments afterwards, post-closing adjustments. It could be the valuation of the property, right? Because we have to declare the valuation to Revenue Canada. There's taxes to be paid on equipment. So we have to know what that is. There's also at the provincial level, there's taxes to be paid on equipment. So we need to be able to allocate the purchase price between the goodwill and the intangibles and the tangibles. So we'll get the accountants involved in that aspect of it. And then there's also the financing aspect. We have to talk to the bankers. Sometimes the banks will be represented by their own lawyers. Other times they will ask the lawyer who's acting on behalf of the buyer to also represent the bank. So then we need to get all that financing information in and make sure that everybody's understanding what they're getting themselves into. So there are a lot of moving parts here that have to work together in order for that to, achieve that possession date so that you can get the keys to the business.
That makes a lot of sense, and it just drives home the point that this is not a run-of-the-mill transaction. It does take time, and there's a lot of expertise involved. I've been on the periphery of a few of these kinds of deals, and it's amazing how complex it can get very quickly, even on what is can be a very essentially a simple deal. It can still be very complex.
Yeah, one of the areas that business owners or business acquirers often don't spend enough time in is the due diligence aspect. And we've talked about that briefly at the beginning of our conversation today. But there is a period of time that you should allow yourself once the agreement is negotiated, that you can get out of the business, that first of all, that you have an opportunity to do your due diligence searches, and that if anything comes up that surprises you, that you have the opportunity to get out of the contract and get your deposit back. So that due diligence aspect is very important, and I think a lot of time people don't spend enough time going through the due diligence. The optimism, you look at a business and you're thinking, oh, this is going to be exciting. You have this idea in your head about running the business, what it's going to look like. You have these dreams of all this income coming in. And you don't really take a long enough and critical look at the insides of the business. So this is an area where you can spend some time taking a look, where you should take a really hard look. The things you should be looking for are, do you have any employment? That's a huge area. If you don't have employment agreements in place, if the vendor doesn't have employment agreements in place, you need to understand what you're acquiring there, because you could be acquiring a lot of liability if you have employees that aren't happy with the new management style.
Right.
You want to understand the financials, of course. That's where you would get your accountant to review the financials, make sure they're all in order. You'll want to take a look at the inventory, make sure there's not a lot of old inventory or unusable inventory in there. You need to understand what kind of inventory you're acquiring, how you're going to price that. Are you pricing that at cost? Those types of things. You'll want to take a look at if you have any supplier agreements. What are those like? Do you have
and what are the relationships? What are the relationships like with your key vendors, right? Like,
right.
You gotta make sure that you're checking in on all those things, because the last thing you want is to take over a company that has strained relationships with key suppliers.
Not only that, but you have things like exclusivity you want to understand, or is this an exclusive dealer, or do you think it's an exclusive dealer, but then you find out when you start taking a look at the contract that it's not an exclusive dealer. It's not until you start taking a closer look at these things that you fully understand what you're getting. Sometimes, I represented a vendor who had a confidential relationship with one of his suppliers, and somebody wanted to sell his business. Well, we had to get into those confidential agreements to see, and so there was all that area around that, and in those confidential agreements, the supplier actually has the ability to cancel the contract if you sell your business to somebody else.
Right.
So they need to be able to vet that business. So if you're buying a business and you think that you're getting a key supplier there, and you start looking into their contract, and in the contract it says that if the vendor sells the business to a third party, if we don't approve that third party, meaning you, the new buyer, then we're terminating the agreement. So imagine you acquire a business, and then all of a sudden, this one key supplier you thought was the whole reason you were buying the business isn't there on the next day. So
And this happens in retail quite a bit, where you have where you think you're buying a relationship with a big brand, for example. Maybe it's exclusive to this city or a geographic territory, and as you say, that maybe you're not buying that. Maybe they don't want to work with you until they've done their due diligence.
exactly. So if you're a buyer, you want to know that, because then you want to be able to approach these people and say, okay, what do I need to do in order to ensure that I'm satisfied, that I'll be comfortable, that I have a workable relationship with you or not. So you need to look in. So it's really important to look into those things, and then you have all the other due diligence searches related to the city and licenses and all that kind of bureaucratic regulation side of thing. And I say that annoyingly because I'm always dealing with bureaucrats, and that annoys me. But that's very important as well, because those are, if you're not licensed properly or the business is not operating properly, you can lose your business. And in fact, I had a client who came to me after he had acquired a business, and the city ended up shutting him down because he didn't have an occupancy permit, and he couldn't get one. So he paid close to $200,000 for a business, and it was worth nothing in the end.
Yeah. Well, that's something that we can all avoid or try to avoid. Can we just talk briefly, because one of the ways people buy businesses often is with a franchise. They'll buy a franchise agreement of some sort. Does the process change at all for you when you're advising a person or a small company that wants to buy a franchise?
Yeah, franchises are it depends on the franchise, really. I mean, it's like buying a car from a car dealer. You'll have good car dealers and good cars, and then you'll have bad car dealers and bad cars. It's the same idea. So same thing. You need to do a lot of due diligence. What I recommend and franchisors have a lot of obligations in terms of disclosures. They have to provide a lot of information to a potential buyer. One of the things I would do with a part of the due diligence is I would want to talk to a number of franchisees. I would want to talk to as many as I can. New franchisees, old franchisees. We've seen in the news in the last couple of years, Subway or Tim Hortons, there was franchisees that were upset.
Right.
The franchises are good in one sense, in the sense that they kind of give you a turnkey operation. But then there's a ton of contractual obligations that you have, and really franchisees don't have a lot of power in terms of the relationship with the franchisor. It's this is the drum we're beating, and you get to march to that beat. And if we decide to change that beat, guess what? You're changing the way you're marching. And if it means cutting into your margins, it means cutting into your margins. If it means you need to spend this amount of money to redo your store, because that's what we're doing right now, then you need to spend that kind of money to redo your store, even if you didn't want to. So you have to be satisfied, and that's a personal decision. It's not really a legal decision or legal advice. But you have to be satisfied that the franchise you're getting in bed with is a franchise that you can live with for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Because realistically, that's how long you need to be in there to be able to get your investment out and to make a decent dollar at it.
That makes sense. And you'd want to ask the same kinds of questions, though, and you'd still need that accounting lawyer tandem team to make that decision to give you the right advice before you make that decision.
Yeah, and it gets a little more complicated, because then you also have, not only do you have all the agreements with the person who's selling you the stuff, but you have all these agreements with the franchisor.
Right.
Right. So there's a three-way negotiation that happens at some point, and if you throw a landlord in there, there's a four-way negotiation that happens at different points. So it can get pretty complex. So if you're buying a franchise from a franchisee, you'll have additional costs related to the franchise aspect of it.
This is all really interesting, and we could talk for hours about specific kinds of deals, but I think we'll wrap it up here with I'll just ask you, are there any other final tips that people should keep in mind if they are in that frame of mind to say, hey, I want to buy my own business, I want to start it, or buy a franchise? What are some of the final tips that you really want to emphasize?
Yeah, so I think what you have to, when you're buying a business, it's very exciting, right? This is a dream that you've had for a very long
You can
time,
fall in love with
and
the
as much as
idea.
you can fall in love with the idea, and as much as you think that you're an objective person and you're a rational person and that you're rational with your money, we're human beings, we're not. We're excited about these things, and it's okay to be excited about buying a business. Because it's a very exciting time in somebody's life, right? It's a new chapter, and it goes on. But remember that the stats show that a lot of businesses fail, and there's reasons for that. You are taking on a huge responsibility. So, and you are taking on a lot of risk. So it's really important I come back to this due diligence aspect. Get excited. It's fun. Run with it, dream about it, but then also make sure that you spend enough time in your due diligence period really analyzing everything and taking a step back. Talk to trusted advisors, whether it's accountants and lawyers or even friends who have experience in business. Obviously, you want people you want to talk to people who've been burned by business also, because they'll bring a much more sobering. That are still in business. You don't want somebody who's completely turned off of it.
Yeah.
But anybody who's been in business for a number of years will have been burned by the business so they will bring a sober second thought to the whole process. And then don't be afraid when you get into the negotiations, because a lot of negotiations happen after the broad strokes are determined. And this is where the lawyers get involved. Mm-hmm. And I've heard today, in fact, I've heard somebody say lawyers kill deals. That's not true. Lawyers are there to assign risk. And when you're buying a company, you want to make sure that the vendor is prepared to, at least for a period of time, remain responsible for some of the promises that they've made you in terms of what the business is capable of doing. If you buy a house, you can go into the house and check the plumbing and do all of that because it's a hard asset. You can check everything. A business, you can't do that. You have to rely on what the business owner is telling you. So that business owner has to stay on the hook for a period of time. We call that the survival period. Mm-hmm. And if the business owner is not prepared to stay on the hook for a period of time, you have to ask yourself some pretty serious questions of, okay, well, what am I really buying here if this person's not prepared to say, to at least guarantee it and indemnify me if those promises that he made didn't turn out. Now, when I'm talking about those promises, I'm not talking about, I'm guaranteeing you that you'll continue making the same income. There's not a business owner in the world that'll do that.
Right.
But there are certain aspects of the fundamental business that you have to rely on the owner. For example, you have to rely on his financials being accurate. Mm-hmm. If somebody's not prepared to say that his financials are accurate and to stand behind that, you should run as fast as you can. So the parting word is, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty. The parting word is more in terms of get excited about the idea, but go slow when you're doing it. Make sure you have wise counsel providing you, and that doesn't have to be a lawyer. It could be a number of people. Wise counsel walking you through that process to give you advice, to bounce ideas off of, and to say, well, okay, what if, and then your lawyers and accountants. Okay, well, this is a risk that you should take, and this is a risk that you shouldn't take. This is a risk that should really fall on the shoulder of the vendor, as opposed to you, the purchaser, because you're relying on that from the vendor. So that's the role that the lawyers will play in a very, if we get down to my role in these things, is to allocate the risk.
Right.
You want to make sure that the parties are prepared to take on to share the risk.
Well, and I think you have another role, and I'll give you a plug here, because you do work very hard to make sure that the legal concepts are understood, that your clients really understand what
Right.
they're getting into. And that's one of the complaints people have with working with lawyers, is that they speak in legalese. And I know you and your team work really, really hard every day to make sure that those concepts are clear and understandable. And so if people want a good legal team, I highly recommend they call you guys, because I know you'll do a great job.
Uh, Hopefully, I wasn't too confusing today to just undermine everything you just said.
No, I don't think so at all. To our viewers, thanks, Philippe. To our viewers, thanks so much for watching today. Please like and share this video, and like TLR Law's Facebook and Instagram accounts if you haven't already. We really appreciate it if you can just hit those like buttons. I just want to close also by reminding people that TLR has 3 locations in Winnipeg now: at the foot of the Provincial Bridge in St. Boniface, over on Pembina Highway at Markham Road, and as well as Sargent Avenue and Wall Street. And please visit TLR Law's website, tlrlaw.ca, where you can subscribe to Philippe's newsletter. He writes a very often funny newsletter that gives you some really practical legal tips, as well as usually a travel commentary or two about what he did this summer. Thanks again, Philippe.